The rain had been falling for 19 hours. Cora Blackstone had been kneeling for 18 of them. Her hands pressed flat against two small mounds of earth dirt packed tight under her palms, rainwater pooling in the depressions her fingers made. The mounds were perfectly shaped, deliberate, each one roughly the size of a child's body. She had dug them herself, one-handed mostly. The other arm hung at her side wrapped in cloth that had once been white, but was now soaked through with rain and old blood. The gash ran from elbow to wrist deep enough that it should have stopped her. It hadn't. The hillside cemetery stretched out around her in gray silence. Weathered headstones leaned at angles, names worn smooth by decades of Appalachian weather. This wasn't the official burial ground. That was 50 yards west, where the plots were marked and measured, where families paid for perpetual care and groundskeepers mowed between the graves every other Thursday. This was just hill, open ground, rocky soil and wild grass, and the kind of quiet that made a person feel small. Cora was not small. She stood 7 feet tall when she bothered to stand. Her shoulders were broader than any man's in 3 counties, built from a lifetime of real physical force, from swinging a blade that weighed more than most children, from carrying the weight of leadership since she was 23 years old. Her skin was the color of old bronze gray-green, in certain light marked with scars that told stories she'd stopped explaining years ago. The traveling cloak she wore had been fine once. You could still see it in the cut, in the way the fabric caught light, even soaked through. Wool lined with silk, hand-stitched with thread that cost more per yard than most people made in a month. The hem was torn now, caked in mud from 4 days of hard riding, blood from the ambush, dirt from digging 2 graves in frozen West Virginia earth. The iron ring on her left hand bore the seal of her house. Most people wouldn't recognize it. Out here, most people had never seen an orc chieftain, much less their queen. She hadn't moved in hours, hadn't blinked, hadn't acknowledged the rain that plastered her dark hair to her neck and shoulders. Her eyes were fixed on the eastern mound, the smaller one, Finn, 3 years old, barely. He'd died 2 weeks ago in her arms, burning with fever, his small hand clutching the leather cord she wore around her neck. He hadn't understood what was happening. He just kept saying he was cold. Even when the fever spiked so high, his skin felt like forge-heated metal. She'd held him through it, through all of it, and when he finally went still, she'd sat there for another hour because putting him down felt like the final betrayal. Caspian had lasted 3 days longer. 5 years old, old enough to understand, old enough to ask her if he was going to die like Finn did, old enough to tell her it was okay that she didn't have to be sad that he'd take care of his little brother wherever they were going. She'd broken after that, not visibly. Queens don't break where people can see. But something inside her had cracked clean through, and she'd known with absolute certainty that she couldn't bury them at home. Not in the Royal Cemetery at Iron Peak Stronghold. Not surrounded by stone monuments and political ceremony. Not where the council would stand in formal rows and murmur the prescribed words of mourning while already calculating how her grief made her vulnerable. So she'd taken 2 cedar boxes, small enough to carry in saddlebags. She'd ridden east with 2 guards, told no one where she was going, and made it 4 days before Commander Rourke's men found her. The ambush had been efficient, professional. 4 riders, timing coordinated, trained by someone who knew exactly how Cora's personal guard operated. Both her escorts were dead before they'd managed to draw weapons. Cora had killed 3 of the attackers with a shoulder that dislocated in the first 30 seconds of fighting. The 4th one had run. She'd kept riding, bleeding, dizzy, because she was not going to bury her sons in the middle of a road. She'd found this cemetery by accident, followed a dirt path up into the mountains too far gone to make rational decisions, operating on instinct and stubbornness. The ground had looked right, high, open, the kind of place that would catch morning light. She'd dug the graves through the night, lowered the cedar boxes with a tenderness that made her hands shake, covered them carefully, pressed the earth down until it held, and then she'd knelt. That had been yesterday morning. The pain in her knees had stopped registering around hour 12. Her body had moved past discomfort into a kind of numb endurance. Cold didn't matter. Hunger didn't matter. The arm was infected, probably from the way it throbbed in time with her pulse, but that didn't matter either. Nothing mattered except the 2 mounds of earth and the weight pressing down on her chest, heavier than armor, heavier than anything she'd carried in her entire life. Grief she'd learned through her husband's death wasn't loud when it finally came. It was a weight that settled in the knees. Callum Hale saw her from the ridge. He'd come up to the cemetery to finish the Morrison commission. The family had been patient, but Callum had promised them a double headstone by the end of the month, and he still needed to do final measurements before he could complete the wheat sheaf border they'd requested. He'd parked his truck at the bottom of the hill, climbed the path with his surveying kit and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The rain was the kind that got into everything. Not heavy enough to run you off, just persistent enough to remind you that November in West Virginia didn't care about your comfort. He'd been doing this work for 7 years, marking graves, cutting stone, carving names into permanence. It was quiet work, steady, the kind of thing that didn't require conversation or explanations or any particular enthusiasm. You measured, you cut, you installed, people paid you. That was the entire transaction. He preferred it that way. He was 33 years old, looked older in certain light, younger in others. The kind of face that didn't leave much impression. Brown eyes, dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw that needed shaving more often than he bothered. Hands that had spent every year of his adult life working stone-wide palms and shortened nails, and knuckles that cracked when the weather turned cold. The chisel in his coat pocket was a constant weight. He'd carried it there for so long, it felt wrong when it wasn't there. A reminder of what he did, who he was, the only identity that had stuck after everything else fell away. He'd been married once, Ilara. She died 7 years ago, cancer that moved faster than any of the doctors had predicted, and Callum had stayed in their house in Ashford for exactly 8 months before he couldn't stand it anymore. Couldn't stand the neighbors who didn't know what to say. Couldn't stand sleeping on his half of the bed. Couldn't stand the way the whole town knew his story and treated him like broken furniture that needed careful handling. So he'd moved up into the hills, built a cabin into the slope half buried so the earth did some of the work keeping wind out, took commissions from families who needed grave markers and didn't ask questions about why he lived alone at the edge of a cemetery. It worked. Mostly, he was lonely the way some people were nearsighted, a constant background condition he'd learned to navigate without thinking about it too much. What he hadn't learned was how to pass someone in pain without stopping. Ilar used to say it was his fatal flaw. Didn't mean it as criticism, just observation. Callum had never been able to see someone hurt and keep walking. He saw the figure from 200 yards out. At first, his brain didn't process it correctly. Too big, wrong proportions. The rain made everything indistinct, and for a solid 10 seconds he thought maybe it was a bear, something that had wandered down from higher elevation. Then the shape resolved into a person. A woman, kneeling in the mud beside 2 small graves that definitely hadn't been there last week. Callum stopped walking. His first instinct was to turn around, go back to the truck. This wasn't his business. This was clearly something private, something he had no part of, and the respectful thing would be to leave. He stood there in the rain toolkit getting heavier and watched her. She wasn't moving. At all. Completely still, like a statue someone had placed on the hillside and forgotten. Her hands were pressed to the earth. Her head was bowed. Rain ran off her in streams. There was blood. He could see it even from this distance, a dark trail running down her forearm, thinned by rainwater into something pink and wrong. Callum's feet made the decision before his brain caught up. He came down the ridge carefully, made noise, gravel crunching under boots. Didn't want to startle her. Didn't want to make this worse than it already was. She didn't look up. He got within 10 feet and stopped again. She was enormous. That was the first clear thought his mind managed to produce. Easily 7 feet tall, even kneeling. Shoulders that looked like they could carry half a ton. Arms thick with muscle and marked with scars that spoke of violence he couldn't imagine. An orc, unmistakably. Gray-green skin. Features that were almost human, but not quite, broader and harder, and built for a lifetime of force. Callum had seen orcs before. Not many. West Virginia wasn't exactly their territory, but he'd seen them at trade fairs passing through towns, keeping to themselves mostly. He knew what they were, knew the stories, knew enough to recognize that this woman was probably more dangerous than anything else he'd encounter in these mountains. But she was bleeding, and she'd been kneeling in the rain long enough that hypothermia was a real concern. And there were 2 small graves in front of her that made his chest hurt to look at. He knelt beside her. She still didn't look at him. Up close, the wound was worse than he'd thought. Deep, ragged, the kind of cut you got from fighting, not from accidents. The cloth wrapped around it was completely soaked through. Infection was going to be a problem if it wasn't already. "I'm going to wrap your arm," Callum said quietly. He didn't ask permission, didn't phrase it as a question, just stated it as fact, the same way he'd say it to anyone bleeding on a hillside in November rain. He pulled the roll of clean linen from his toolkit. He kept it there for job site cuts, the kind of minor injuries that came from working with chisels and mallets all day. This wasn't a minor injury, but it was what he had. He reached for her arm. She let him. Didn't speak. Didn't move except to shift her weight slightly so he could access the wound. But her eyes tracked him. Dark amber, sharp even through exhaustion. The kind of gaze that evaluated threats as a matter of trained instinct. Callum unwrapped the old cloth. The wound underneath was angry edges, inflamed but not as bad as it could have been. He cleaned it with water from his canteen, working carefully, then wrapped it tight with the linen. His hands were steady. He'd done this kind of field medicine before, back when he used to work construction, before he'd settled into stonework. When he tied it off, she looked back at the graves. Callum sat back on his heels. Rain soaked through his jacket. Cold settled into his joints. He looked at the 2 mounds of earth, perfectly shaped, clearly dug by hand, with enormous care. He knew what grief looked like. He'd worn it for 2 years straight, had seen it in the mirror every morning until he'd finally stopped checking. This was that. The same weight, the same hollow expression. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what had brought her here, didn't know whose graves these were, or why an orc chieftain, which she clearly was, from the quality of that cloak and the ring on her finger, was kneeling in the rain in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia. But he knew she was grieving, and he knew what happened if you stayed out here much longer. The cold would take her, maybe not today, but soon. "There's a fire in my cabin," Callum said after a long silence. "Food if you want it. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." He paused. "I'm not going to ask questions." She looked at him then, really looked. Her expression didn't change much, but something shifted in her eyes. Toward his cabin. He didn't look back to toward his cabin. He didn't look back to see if she followed, but after a minute he heard footsteps behind him. Heavy, uneven, the gait of someone who'd been kneeling too long and whose body was barely holding together. He kept walking. The cabin was small, one room mostly, stone fireplace that Callum had rebuilt 3 times before it drew properly. A work table covered in chisels and half-finished sketches. 2 chairs, though only one ever got used. A narrow bed against the far wall. Shelves with dried herbs and canned goods and the kind of basic supplies that kept a person alive through winter. Without requiring trips to town, Callum got the fire going. Didn't say anything. Just built it up from coals, added kindling, waited for it to catch. The cabin warmed slowly. The orc woman stood near the door, dripping, watching him with that same careful assessment. Callum pulled a blanket from the shelf, held it out. She took it after a moment, wrapped it around her shoulders, didn't sit, just stood there, water pooling at her feet, staring at the fire like it was the first warm thing she'd seen in weeks. Callum went to the stove, started heating water. He had dried beans, potatoes, some salt pork that was probably older than it should be, but hadn't killed him yet. He started assembling something that could pass for soup. She watched him work. He was aware of her size in a way that was hard to ignore. The cabin felt smaller with her in it, not threatening exactly, just overwhelming, the sheer physical presence of someone built on a completely different scale. When the soup was ready, he ladled it into 2 bowls, set one on the table, took his own to the chair by the fire. She looked at the bowl for a long time before sitting down. The first spoonful seemed to surprise her, or maybe not surprise, something else, like she'd forgotten what simple food tasted like. Food that didn't come with ceremony or expectations, or the weight of 1,000 political considerations. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned to make meals last. Callum ate his own soup and didn't watch her. Gave her space. The fire crackled, rain drummed on the roof. Outside, the cemetery was slowly disappearing into November darkness. She finished the bowl, set it down, looked at him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough, deep. the kind of voice that had spent years giving orders and speeches and pronouncements. But there was something else underneath. Exhaustion. Grief so heavy it bent the words. Callum nodded. "You are welcome to the bed. I'll take the floor." "I cannot." "Yes, you can." He said it gently but firmly. "You're injured. You need rest. I've slept on worse." She opened her mouth, closed it. Something in her expression shifted again. That same surprise or maybe gratitude, though she looked like she didn't quite know what to do with either. She stood, moved to the bed, sat on the edge of it like she was testing whether it would hold her weight. It did, barely. She lay down without taking off the cloak, pulled the blanket over herself, closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Callum sat by the fire and worked on sketches, border designs for the Morrison headstone, wheat sheaves the family had requested. Something about grain meaning something to them, or maybe the wife had just liked the look of it. Didn't matter. The border mattered because the name mattered. Anything that made a name feel less bare on stone was worth the extra time. He worked until the fire burned down to coals. Then he spread his bedroll on the floor, pulled his coat over himself, and tried to sleep. Around midnight, she cried out. Not loud, just a sound of pain so raw it cut through the cabin like a blade. Words in a language he didn't know. Orcish, probably. The sound of someone dreaming about things they couldn't escape. Callum went still, listened, waited to see if she'd wake herself up. She didn't. The sound faded. Her breathing settled back into sleep. He stayed awake for another hour just in case. The first morning was practical and quiet. Callum woke at dawn out of habit, built the fire back up, put water on for coffee. When he turned around, she was sitting up in bed watching him with those amber eyes. "Coffee?" he asked. She nodded. He poured 2 cups, set one on the small table beside the bed, took his own back to the chair. They drank in silence. After a while, Callum pulled out his medical kit. "Need to check that arm." She extended it without argument. He unwrapped the linen and examined the wound. It looked better than he'd expected, already starting to close, healing faster than any human wound would. He cleaned it again, applied a poultice made from comfrey that his neighbor Helen sent up twice a year because she worried about him, wrapped it fresh. "You heal fast," he said. "Orc physiology." She said it plainly, not defensive, just stating fact. He nodded, finished wrapping. "Should be fine in a few days." "Thank you." He went back to his coffee. She went back to staring at the fire. That set the pattern for the next 3 days. Callum worked. She watched. He cooked simple meals. She ate them. He changed her bandages morning and evening. She submitted to it with the patience of someone who'd spent time in field conditions before. She didn't offer her name. He didn't ask. On the 3rd day it snowed. Not much, just enough to turn the cemetery white and make the cabin feel even smaller. Callum had the Morrison commission to work on, the double headstone with the wheat sheaf border. He worked at the table with small chisels and a wooden mallet, letters appearing one careful strike at a time. She sat by the fire and watched him work with focused attention. "What does the border mean?" she asked eventually. First real question she had posed. Callum looked up from the stone. "The wheat sheaves." He tapped the sketch with the end of his chisel. "Family asked for it. I think they were farmers, or maybe grain meant something to them, or maybe she just liked the look of it." "But you include it." "I include whatever they ask for." He set the chisel down. "The border matters because the name matters. Anything that makes a name feel less bare on stone is worth doing right." She was quiet for a long moment. "Could you make 2 small stones?" she asked. Callum's hands went still. He looked at her carefully. "What do you want on them?" "2 names." Her voice was steady, controlled, the voice of someone who'd practiced not breaking. "Caspian and Finn, nothing else, just the names." He didn't ask whose names they were. He already knew, had known from the moment he'd seen those 2 small graves. "I can do that," he said quietly. She nodded once, looked back at the fire. Callum pulled out his stock of good slate, started measuring. He worked that evening while she slept, and he worked with the same care he gave every name, because they were names that mattered to someone, because that was the whole point of what he did, because some things deserve to be permanent. The shift happened gradually. On the 4th day, she told him she was good with an axe. Callum had a winter's worth of firewood to split and had been putting it off because his back wasn't what it used to be. He'd been planning to tackle it over the next week little by little. She split 6 months' worth in one afternoon. Even with the injured shoulder, even with an arm that was still healing, she moved through the woodpile with cheerful efficiency that made Callum feel vaguely embarrassed about his own work ethic. He stood and watched, tried not to stare at the casual power of it, the way she could sink an axe through oak like it was pine, the way she didn't even seem to be trying. She caught him watching. Something flickered across her face. Not vanity, something more complicated, like she'd forgotten briefly that she was capable of anything. That evening, Callum made soup that was better than usual because he'd found stored onions he'd forgotten about. She had 3 bowls. He was disproportionately pleased. On the 5th day, he taught her the local word for enough. She kept stopping mid-sentence when she was trying to explain something using an Orcish word that clearly didn't translate. The concept of sufficient but not excessive. The human equivalent sounded clumsy to her. Enough, Callum said. That's the word. Just enough. She repeated it, frowned. It sounds like someone sneezing. He laughed. Actual laughter. The sound surprised him. She looked startled, then she smiled, brief and real, looked away quickly like the smile had caught her off guard too. On the 6th day, she taught him an Orcish word. Kethera wawa, she said. They were sitting by the fire close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off her. She ran warmer than any human. It means the place where your grief fits, not a building, not a location, the place where your pain can exist without apology. Callum turned the word over in his mind. There was no English equivalent, nothing even close. Cathara, he repeated. She nodded. You have it, here. She gestured to the cabin. You built Cathara. That evening they sat by the fire and she told him in careful pieces that she had lost 2 sons. Didn't say to what, didn't explain the circumstances. Just said she'd carried them as far as she could and left them somewhere that felt like the right kind of quiet. Callum told her about Alara, about the cancer, about the year he'd spent in Ashford unable to eat anything she used to cook, which had narrowed his diet considerably. They sat with that for a while. Does it get smaller? She asked. The grief. No, Callum said honestly. It doesn't get smaller. It just becomes less sharp, like worn stone instead of broken glass. Is that comforting? I don't know, but it's true. She nodded slowly. True is better. On the 7th morning, he found her outside before dawn. She was sitting on the ground facing east, eyes closed, hands resting palm up on her knees. Some kind of meditation or prayer. He didn't know enough about Orc customs to say which. He brought her coffee, set it beside her without interrupting. She opened her eyes when he turned to go, looked at the cup, looked at him. She said something in Orcish. The tone made it sound like thank you didn't quite cover it, like there was a depth of gratitude there that the words couldn't hold. Callum went back inside and let her have the morning. He was not paying attention to the iron ring anymore. He'd started paying attention to other things. The way her hands moved when she was thinking through something. The small restless gesture she made with her left thumb when she was holding back what she actually wanted to say. The way she turned her head slightly when she was listening carefully, giving him her full attention. He was not naming what was happening. He was 33 years old, had been alone for 7 years, and he'd learned the precise danger of wanting things you couldn't have. But he was aware at the end of the 7th day that he'd stopped counting the days until she would leave. The rider came on the morning of the 8th day. Callum was down at the cemetery setting the small slate stones. He'd finished them in 2 evenings, carved careful and exact. Caspian and Finn. Simple. Clean. The kind of markers that would last 100 years if the weather was kind. He was adjusting the angle on Finn's stone, making sure it would catch morning light when he heard hoofbeats on the gravel path. He looked up. The orc on horseback was enormous, easily as tall as the woman back at his cabin, armored in steel plate that caught the weak November sun. The horse underneath him was built like a draft animal, thick-legged and powerful. The rider wore a clan sigil on his chest plate. Callum didn't recognize it, but clearly it meant something, because the 2 villagers from Ashford, who happened to be on the road, immediately cleared the path and stood very still. The rider spotted Callum, then looked toward the cabin, then swung off the horse and strode toward the door without acknowledging Callum at all. Callum followed at a reasonable distance, the kind of distance that said, "I live here," without saying, "I'm unafraid of you," which would have been a lie. He came through the cabin door to find her standing in the center of the room. She'd changed, not physically, but everything about her posture was different. She was wearing her actual clothes from beneath the cloak, which had dried and been tended while he'd been sleeping. Dark leather tunic, heavy linen with clan markings along the collar and sleeves. Her hair was pulled back. The ring was visible on her finger. She was standing with her spine straight and her chin level, and every molecule of her body was doing something different than it had done for the past 8 days. The rider, an older warrior with gray at the temples, was speaking to her in rapid Orcish. The tone was somewhere between fury and relief, professional disapproval barely containing actual emotion. Callum caught none of the words, but he watched her face, watched her respond in the same controlled tone, watched the warrior's expression shift from anger to something closer to relief. After a moment, the warrior turned and looked at Callum, assessing, measuring, the way you'd look at an unexpected variable in a plan that was already complicated enough. "Callum Hale," she said. She said his name the way she'd been saying it for 8 days, plainly, without any of the formality that was otherwise radiating off her like heat. Then she said something to the warrior in Orcish. The warrior's gaze didn't soften, but it did become less openly hostile. He left, waited outside. The silence after the door closed was thick. Callum set his toolkit on the table. "I understand if you need to go." She looked at him for a long moment, then she told him her full name. Cora Blackstone, chieftain queen of the Iron Peak clan, sovereign of the Rockborn territories in Colorado. She said it without pride, without ceremony, like she was handing him something she'd been carrying and was tired of holding. Like this was the remainder of her dignity, the need to be honest with someone who'd been honest with her. Callum let the words settle. Chieftain queen, sovereign, the kind of titles that came with armies and territories and political weight he couldn't begin to imagine. He looked at the fire, looked at the 2 small stones on his work table waiting to be placed, looked at her. "I'm glad you told me," he said carefully. She started to say something, stopped, started again. "I did not hide my identity to deceive you," she said quietly. "I hid it because I needed for a small number of days to be no one, just someone with grief and a wound, among the ordinary dead on an ordinary hill." Callum was quiet for a long moment. "I understand that," he said. Something in her expression cracked, just slightly, the careful composure slipping enough to show what was underneath. Uncertainty, exhaustion, the weight of having to be strong when strength was the last thing she had left. "Are you leaving now?" he asked. "My council will need me back within 2 weeks, maybe 3 if Ragnar can keep them calm." She said it like the words had weight she was already tired of carrying. "Political matters." He nodded. "The stones will be ready." He went back to the cemetery. He placed Caspian stone and Finn stone in the earth at the head of each grave, precisely aligned names facing east, to catch the morning light the way he'd intended. He worked with care, didn't think about what he was feeling. That wasn't useful when holding sharp tools. When he came back, she was still there. She was sitting at his work table looking at the charcoal sketches. Border designs, wheat sheaves and oak leaves and simple geometric patterns. Reference drawings for future commissions. She had her chin in her hand. She looked in that moment like no one's queen. Callum sat in the other chair, the one that hadn't been used in 7 years. "I don't know what to say to a chieftain queen," he said honestly. "You didn't need to know for 8 days, she said. "You can keep not knowing if you want." "What does that mean?" She turned one of the sketches over in her hands. "It means I have to leave tomorrow morning. It means my clan will have questions about where I've been and who helped me. Those questions will have implications I cannot fully shield you from if you stay here." She paused. "If you wanted, you could come." She said it directly. No cushioning, no softening, just the offer laid out plain. "Come where?" "To Iron Peak, to Colorado." She set the sketch down. "The territory has a stoneworkers' hall that sat empty for 3 years. Our last mason died and no one has taken the commission. It would be yours if you wanted it. The work would be steady, the pay better than you've seen. And the hillside cemetery above the stronghold needs someone who understands what names on stone are actually for. She looked at him. That's the practical offer. There's another one I'm less certain about making. Make it, Callum said. I have spent 8 days being no one in the company of someone who saw me as no one and treated me as someone anyway. I do not have those days very often. She paused. I want more of them. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was an orc chieftain queen standing in a doorway in gray morning light, telling him the truth with the same directness she used for everything because she hadn't learned any other way to do it. Callum looked at his cabin, the patched roof, the single chair, the work table where strangers' names had become his whole winter, the shelf of herbs from Helen. He thought about Alara, about the 7 years he'd spent becoming comfortable with absence. He thought about a woman kneeling in the rain with her hands on 2 small graves, grief too large to stand up under. I'm not going to take your stoneworker's haul, he said. She absorbed that. Her expression didn't change. I'll need to find my own workshop, he continued. If that's all the same to you, I work better when the space is my own. He paused. But I assume there is other stone in your territory that needs someone who understands it. She was very still for a moment. There is, she said quietly. Then I'll need to settle a few things in Ashford. A week, maybe 2. He looked at her. But I'll come. She looked at him for a long time, checking for hesitation, for false bravery, for the kind of yes that would become no once distance intervened. She must have found something that satisfied her because she gave a single short nod. Then she reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. Brief, firm, the kind of touch that in orc custom clearly meant something. I will have the road marked for you, she said. If you get lost, you're a fool and I will not feel sorry for you. Callum almost smiled. I'm not the one who spent 18 hours sitting in the rain. She did smile then, just slightly, just enough. She walked to her horse. The warrior was already mounted, waiting with the practiced patience of someone used to royal delays. Callum stood in the doorway and watched them ride down the mountain path until they disappeared into the trees. The cabin felt very empty. He looked at the 2 chairs, the fire burning low, the coffee cup still sitting on the table. Then he went back to work. There were things to finish. The Morrison headstone needed completing, stones to cut, a life to dismantle carefully before building something new. He had 2 weeks. He intended to use them well. Callum arrived at Iron Peak Stronghold 19 days later, 15 days after Cora had left his cabin, 4 days later than he'd originally planned, which bothered him more than it probably should have. He'd gotten turned around somewhere outside Denver, taken what he thought was a shortcut that turned out to be 40 miles in the wrong direction and wasted half a day backtracking. The stronghold wasn't what he'd imagined. He'd been picturing a castle. Something grand and imposing, built for defense, all stone walls and narrow windows in the kind of architecture that said, we expect to be attacked frequently. What he found was a city. It sprawled across a series of connected ridges in the Colorado Rockies built into and around the natural stone formations in a way that made it hard to tell where the mountain ended and the construction began. Buildings of real scale and craft, open market structures with canvas roofs and wooden stalls, a great hall that had been engineered with more understanding of load-bearing principles than Callum had expected, and he couldn't stop looking at it for the first 20 minutes. People moved through the streets with the comfortable rhythm of any established community. Orc children ran between market stalls. Elders sat on stone benches in the late afternoon sun. Merchants called out prices. Someone was shouting about fresh bread. It looked like a town, not a military fortress, a place where people actually lived. Callum drove his pickup truck through the main gate feeling profoundly out of place. The guards watched him with professional curiosity, but didn't stop him. Someone must have told them to expect a human in an ancient Ford with West Virginia plates. Cora met him at the inner courtyard. She hadn't sent a servant. She was standing there herself, wearing formal clan attire that made her look simultaneously more and less like the woman who'd sat by his fire for 8 days. More because this was clearly who she actually was, chieftain queen in her own territory, comfortable with power in a way she'd never been in his cabin. Less because some of the rawness was gone, replaced by the controlled composure of someone who'd spent 3 weeks putting herself back together. You're late, she said. Got lost, Callum admitted. I told you I wouldn't feel sorry for you. You also told me you'd mark the road. I did. You missed the markers. Something flickered in her eyes, amusement maybe, or relief that he'd actually come. She gestured for him to follow. There's a residence prepared, small, on the eastern edge. Good light for stonework. I don't need, you need somewhere to sleep, Hallam Hale. Don't be difficult. He followed her through the stronghold, aware of the eyes tracking them. Not hostile exactly, just intensely curious. A human walking beside their queen wasn't something they saw often. The residence she'd arranged was indeed small. One large room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain, a space that could work as a workshop, windows facing east that would catch morning sun. Simple furniture, a fireplace already laid with wood. The council wants to meet you, Cora said from the doorway. Tomorrow, afternoon. What should I expect? Questions, many questions. Some of them will be polite. She paused. Most of them won't be. Should I be worried? That depends on whether you're easily intimidated. Callum set his bag down, looked at her. She was standing in the doorway the same way she'd stood in his cabin that last morning. Like she was holding herself carefully, not quite letting herself relax. Thank you, he said, for this, for making space. You made space for me when I had nowhere else to go. This is simply returning the courtesy. She left before he could respond. The council meeting happened in the Great Hall. 7 elders sat in a semicircle of carved stone chairs that had probably been here longer than Callum had been alive. The hall itself was impressive high ceilings, supported by columns that showed real engineering, skill walls decorated with clan banners, and historical tapestries. Cora sat at the head of the semicircle, separate from the elders, but clearly presiding. She'd introduced him simply. Callum Hale, Stonemason. He will be working on our memorial projects. No mention of how they'd met, no mention of the 8 days, just the professional introduction. The questioning started immediately. Elder Morgan Gray spoke first. She was perhaps 65 with iron gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. You're human. I am, Callum said. You bring no political alliance, no military value, no family connections that benefit the Iron Peak clan. That's correct. Then why are you here? Callum looked at Cora briefly. She gave him nothing. No help. No indication of what answer she wanted. This was his to navigate. I'm here because I know how to cut stone, he said carefully. I know how to make names permanent. And I was told you need someone who understands that work. We need many things, another elder said. Younger, maybe 40, built like he'd spent decades in combat. A stonemason is low on that list. Then you won't mind if I work quietly and don't bother anyone. Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. The Queen brought you here personally. That suggests you are more than just a stonemason. Callum held her gaze. I'm exactly a stonemason. What the Queen's reasons are for bringing me here, you'd have to ask her. We have asked her. She's been remarkably unhelpful. From her seat, Cora's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested she was enjoying this more than she should be. The questions continued for another hour. Where was he from? What was his training? Had he worked with orc clans before? Did he understand their burial customs? What did he know about Iron Peak politics? Callum answered honestly when he could, admitted ignorance when he couldn't, didn't try to be more than he was. Finally, Morgan leaned back in her chair. You understand that your presence here will be seen as unusual. People will make assumptions. I expect they will. Those assumptions may make your work difficult. I've worked in difficult conditions before. Not like this, you haven't. Callum didn't argue. She was right. Morgan looked at Cora, then back at Callum. The council does not formally oppose your presence, but we do not formally approve it either. You are here on trial. If you cause problems, you will be asked to leave. Understood. You may go. Callum stood, nodded to the council, walked out of the great hall with as much dignity as he could manage. Cora caught up with him outside. That went better than I expected, she said. They hated me. They were suspicious. That's different from hatred, and Morgan is always suspicious. It's her job. What's my job? To prove them wrong. She looked at him. Or prove them right. whichever happens to be true. That evening, Morgan appeared at Callum's workshop unannounced. He looked up from unpacking his tools, surprised. The elder had never sought him out before. "May I?" She gestured to the chair he'd just assembled. "Of course, buying." She sat studying the space, the tools laid out with methodical care, the sketches pinned to the wall, the slate samples stacked by size and quality. "You do this seriously," she observed. "It's serious work." "Most humans I've met treat stonework as a trade, a way to make money. You treat it differently." Callum set down the chisel he'd been examining. "Names matter. The people who carry them, the people who remember them. If I'm going to put someone's name on stone, I'm going to do it right." Morgan was quiet for a moment. "I lost a daughter 40 years ago. Winter fever like the Queen's sons. There was no memorial. We didn't have the custom then. We just buried them and moved on." Callum didn't know what to say to that. "When Cora announced this memorial wall, I thought it was weakness," Morgan continued. "Indulgence, a queen making decisions from grief instead of wisdom." She touched the edge of his work table. "But I was wrong. This isn't weakness. This is what we should have done 40 years ago." She stood. "I'm still not convinced about you, Stonemason. But I'm watching, and I'm willing to be proven wrong." She left before he could respond. The work started the next day. Callum set up his workshop properly, arranging tools the way he'd learned over 15 years of cutting stone. Chisels organized by size and angle, mallets sorted by weight, measuring instruments calibrated and ready, sketching materials within easy reach. The first commission came from Cora herself. "There's a memorial wall," she said, appearing in his workshop that evening. "Eastern courtyard, for Caspian and Finn. I want it done properly." She handed him sketches, simple designs, 2 panels side by side, names and dates, nothing elaborate. "You sure you want simple?" Callum asked. "I want honest. Simple as honest." He worked on it for 3 days, chose slate that would hold detail well, carved the letters with the same care he'd given to the small stones in West Virginia, added small details that wouldn't be visible from a distance, but would matter up close. The curve of certain letters, the spacing that made names feel less isolated. When he installed them, Cora stood and looked at them for a long time without speaking. "You added something," she said eventually. "Just the spacing makes it easier to read. It makes it easier to see them as people." She paused. "Thank you." She left before he could see if she was crying. Bryn Ashford appeared on the 4th day. She was 21, human with red hair, pulled back in a practical braid, and the kind of efficient energy that suggested she never stopped moving. She worked as a secretary and translator for the council, handling correspondence between Iron Peak and human settlements. "Elder Morgan sent me," she said, appearing in Callum's workshop without knocking. "Said you probably needed help navigating things. Cultural things." "Did she?" "Well, she said you were going to make an idiot of yourself eventually, and it would reflect badly on the stronghold if nobody warned you first." Bryn grinned. "I'm paraphrasing." Callum set down his chisel. "What kind of warnings are we talking about?" "For starters, don't ever touch someone's weapon, not even to move it out of the way. That's a killing offense in some clans." "Good to know." "Also, if someone offers you food from their plate, that's a significant gesture. You're expected to accept unless you have a good reason to refuse. What counts is a good reason. Allergies, religious prohibition. You're already dying of poison." She ticked them off on her fingers. Being full doesn't count. Over the next week, Bryn became a fixture in the workshop. She'd show up with information Callum didn't know he needed. Corrections to pronunciation. Explanations of why certain gestures meant certain things. Stories about clan history that gave context to current politics. She was also the first person to ask the question directly. "So what's actually going on with you and the Queen?" Callum didn't look up from the stone he was working on. "I'm making her a memorial. That's what's going on." "That's not what I asked. It's what I'm answering." Bryn studied him for a moment. "You know people are talking." "I expect they are. Does that bother you?" "Should it? Probably. Orc clans have very specific ideas about relationships and status and who belongs with who. A human stonemason and a chieftain queen isn't exactly traditional." Callum finally looked up. We're not in a relationship. She needed help. I helped. That's all. If you say so. Bryn didn't sound convinced. Just be careful. Politics here are complicated, and you're right in the middle of them whether you want to be or not. She left and Callum went back to work, but her words stayed with him. Cora visited the workshop most evenings. She'd come after council sessions late, carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent hours managing other people's disagreements. She'd sit on the workbench, legs dangling, and watch him work in comfortable silence. Sometimes they talked. Small things. The weather, problems with a commission, whether the stone he'd chosen would hold up to Colorado winters. Other times they didn't talk at all. On the 10th night she brought tea, 2 cups, set one beside him without asking. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Well enough. People are suspicious, but not hostile. That's about as good as you'll get initially." Bryn's been helpful. Bryn is helpful to everyone. It's her gift. Cora sipped her tea. "The council is still debating you." "What is there to debate, whether you're here for work or for other reasons?" Callum set down his chisel. "What did you tell them? That you're here because I asked you to be, that your reasons are your own. That's not going to satisfy them." "I'm not particularly concerned with satisfying them on this matter." She looked at him. "Do you regret coming?" "No. Even though it's difficult." "Difficult doesn't mean impossible." She smiled slightly. "You have practice with difficult." 7 years of it. They sat in silence for a while. The workshop was warm from the small forge Callum used for heating metal tools. Outside, the stronghold was settling into evening routines. Voices in the distance, the smell of cooking fires. "I've been thinking about what you said," Cora said eventually, "about grief becoming less sharp. And I'm not sure it's true for me yet, but I think I understand what you meant." Callum turned to look at her. She was staring at her tea, expression distant. "It's been 3 weeks," she said quietly, "since I buried them in West Virginia. 4 weeks since they died. And I keep expecting to fall apart, to break the way I did in your cabin. But I'm just here, functioning, leading council sessions, making decisions, like nothing happened. That doesn't mean nothing happened. It feels like betrayal, like I should be more destroyed than this." "You are destroyed. You're just still standing." Callum set his cup down. "That's not betrayal. That's survival." She looked at him then. Really looked. "How did you do it after Alara?" "Badly at first. I tried to pretend everything was normal. That lasted about 6 months before I couldn't stand being in my own life anymore. Then I moved to the cabin and stopped pretending." "Did that help?" "Eventually. Gave me space to fall apart where nobody was watching." "I don't have that luxury. Queens don't get to fall apart." "They do in my workshop," Callum said quietly. "If they need to." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, set down her tea, left without another word, but she came back the next night, and the night after that. Commander Rourke Blackridge arrived at the stronghold on the 15th day. Callum heard about it before he saw the man. Bryn came running to the workshop, slightly out of breath. "He's here. Rourke, with a full retinue. Should that mean something to me?" "He's the military commander from the Northern Territories, also the biggest political threat to Cora's leadership." Bryn leaned against the doorframe. "Also, he's wanted to marry her for about 3 years." That got Callum's attention. Marry her, political alliance. His territory and hers combined would basically control the entire Rocky Mountain region. The council's been pushing for it since Thorin died. Does she want to marry him? Does she look like someone who wants to marry for political convenience? Callum thought about Cora sitting on his workbench drinking tea in comfortable silence. No, exactly. But Rourke doesn't take no for an answer easily. And with her disappearing for 8 days right after her sons died, he's been making noise about her being unfit to lead. That's cruel. Cruel and effective. The council's been divided. Callum set down his tools. Where is she now? Great Hall, formal reception. You're not invited. I wasn't asking for an invitation. He went anyway. The Great Hall was full, easily 200 people, maybe more. Orcs in formal clan attire, warriors in ceremonial armor. The entire council seated in their stone chairs. Cora stood at the center wearing full chieftain regalia, dark leather and steel, the iron ring prominent on her hand, her spine straight, her expression controlled into perfect political neutrality. Rourke stood facing her. He was massive even by orc standards, broad-shouldered and heavily muscled with scars that suggested a lifetime of combat. Gray streaked his dark hair. He wore commander's insignia and carried himself with absolute confidence. 3 weeks, he was saying. His voice carried across the hall. You were gone for 3 weeks, no word, no explanation. 2 of your guards dead, and you expect the council to simply accept this? I expect the council to respect that I had personal matters to attend to. Cora's voice was cold, formal, nothing like the way she spoke in the workshop. Personal matters that left your territory vulnerable. My territory is not vulnerable. Then where were you? That is not your concern, Commander. It is when your fitness to lead is in question. Silence rippled through the hall. Cora didn't flinch. Are you formally challenging my authority? I'm raising concerns the council shares. Legitimate concerns about whether a leader who abandons her people in grief is capable of making clear decisions. I did not abandon anyone. You disappeared for 3 weeks. I buried my sons. Her voice cracked through the hall like thunder, the control finally breaking. I buried my children, Rourke, and I did it somewhere quiet because I could not bear to do it here, surrounded by politics and performance. That is not abandonment. That is being human. She stopped, corrected herself, being a person who needed space to grieve. The hall was absolutely silent. Rourke's expression shifted, something calculating. And where did this grief take you? West Virginia. Alone. After my guards were killed by assassins. Yes, alone. Assassins you claim were mine. I claim nothing. I state facts. 4 riders attacked my escort. Professional, well-trained, using tactics consistent with Northern Territory methods. Rourke smiled thinly. Accusations without evidence. Observations without conclusions. They stared at each other. Finally, Rourke turned to the council. I propose a formal review of the Queen's recent decisions. 30 days. The council evaluates her fitness to lead. If she's found wanting, a new chieftain is selected. Morgan stood. This is highly irregular. So is a queen disappearing for 3 weeks. The council looked at each other. At Cora. The weight of political calculation visible in every face. Finally, Morgan nodded. The council will consider Commander Rourke's proposal. We will vote tomorrow. The hall erupted in conversation. Cora stood perfectly still. Her expression hadn't changed. But Callum could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched at her sides. Rourke approached her, spoke quietly enough that most people couldn't hear. This doesn't have to be difficult. Marry me. Combine our territories. Rule together. Your sons are gone. You need heirs. I can give you that. I would rather abdicate than marry you for political convenience. You say that now, but when the council votes against you, you'll reconsider. He left before she could respond. The hall slowly emptied. Cora remained standing in the center, surrounded by empty space, looking more alone than Callum had seen her since that first day in the rain. He made his way through the crowd, stood beside her, didn't touch her, didn't say anything. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Probably not. This will make things worse for you. I'm already in the middle of it. Might as well stand where I'm useful. She looked at him then, some of the control cracking. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can. You don't know that. I know you kneeled in freezing rain for 18 hours rather than give up on your sons. I know you rode 4 days bleeding and injured because you refused to bury them on a roadside. You can do this. She closed her eyes, took a breath. 30 days. So we have 30 days to figure it out. You said you wanted more of those 8 days. Someone who sees you as a person instead of a queen. Callum looked around the empty hall. Seems like you need that now more than ever. She opened her eyes, looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or relief or just exhaustion so deep it didn't have a name. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. I don't know anything about politics. Good, everyone else knows too much. Maybe ignorance will be useful. They stood there in the empty hall as the evening light faded through the high windows. Tomorrow the council would vote. Tomorrow the 30-day countdown would begin. Tomorrow everything would get harder. But for now they had this. The quiet after the storm, the moment before the next crisis. It would have to be enough. The council voted the next morning, 5-2 in favor of Rourke's proposal, 30 days to evaluate Cora's fitness to lead. The terms were specific. Cora would continue her normal duties. The council would observe. At the end of 30 days, they would vote on whether she remained chieftain queen or whether leadership passed to someone else. Rourke's name was never explicitly mentioned as the alternative. It didn't need to be. Callum heard about it from Bryn, who appeared in his workshop looking furious. "It's a coup," she said. "They're just calling it a review to make it sound legitimate. Can they actually remove her? If 5 council members vote yes, they can do anything. That's how clan law works. What happens if they remove her? Rourke becomes chieftain. Maybe not immediately, but within a year. He's the logical choice. Military experience, strong territory. The council already trusts him more than they trust her." Callum set down the stone he'd been examining. "What can I do? You nothing, you're human, you have no political standing. If you try to help, you'll just give them more ammunition to use against her. So I just watch. Unless you have a better idea." He didn't. That evening, Cora came to the workshop later than usual. She looked exhausted, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. She sat on the workbench, stared at the floor. 30 days, she said. "I heard. Rourke is going to spend those 30 days undermining everything I do. Every decision will be questioned, every weakness exposed. And at the end, the council will vote him in and tell themselves they did it for the good of the clan. You don't know that." "Yes, I do. I've seen this before. My husband, Thorin, he fought off a similar challenge 3 months before he died. Barely won. And he was..." She trailed off. "What? Everything I'm not. Charismatic, politically savvy, born into leadership. I was just the woman he married. When he died, I inherited the position by default. The council has never fully accepted me." Callum moved to sit beside her on the bench. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to fight, to prove them wrong, to show them I'm stronger than they think." She looked at him. "Part of me wants to walk away, let Rourke have it, go somewhere quiet and stop carrying all of this." "Which part is louder?" She was quiet for a long moment. "The second one, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because if I want to quit, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not fit to lead." Callum shook his head. "Wanting to quit doesn't mean you should. It just means you're tired. There's a difference." "How do you know one?" "Because I wanted to quit for 2 straight years after Alara died. Wanted to stop existing, stop feeling, just be done with all of it." He looked at his hands. "But I didn't. And eventually the wanting to quit got quieter. Not gone, just quieter." "What made it quieter?" "Time, work, finding things that mattered in small ways." He gestured to the workshop, cutting names into stone, making sure people are remembered properly. "It wasn't grand, but it was enough." Cora nodded slowly. "What if nothing I do is enough? What if I fight for 30 days and lose anyway?" "Then you lose knowing you fought. That's better than losing because you quit." She looked at him. "You sound very certain." "I'm not certain about anything, but I know regret. And I know that regret for trying is easier to live with than regret for not trying." She sat with that, finally nodded. 30 days. 30 days. "Will you help me? I don't know how to help with politics. I don't need political help. I need..." She struggled for words. "I need someone who reminds me why I'm doing this. Someone who sees me instead of the position." "Can you do that?" "Yes," Callum said. "I can do that." She reached out and took his hand, held it, the same way she had that first night in the cabin. Connection without complexity. They sat there as the light faded. 30 days. It would have to be enough. The first week of the 30 days passed like slow erosion. Cora attended council sessions where every decision was questioned, every judgment scrutinized. Rourke sat in the observer's gallery silent, impatient, watching her like a predator watching wounded prey. Callum worked in his workshop and listened to Bryn's reports each evening. "He's not attacking her directly," Bryn said on the 5th day. "He's just asking questions, reasonable questions. Is this the best use of resources? Have we considered alternatives? What if this decision backfires? He sounds concerned, thoughtful, like he's trying to help. But he's not. He's undermining her authority one question at a time, and the council is starting to listen. Callum carved harder than necessary. The chisel slipped. He swore quietly. You can't help her by breaking tools, Bryn said. I'm not trying to help, I'm just working. Right, that's why you've asked me about council procedures 4 times this week. He set down the chisel. What am I supposed to do? I'm a stonemason. I don't know anything about orc politics, or clan law, or how to fight someone like Rourke. Maybe that's not what she needs you to fight. What does that mean? Bryn looked at him. She's fighting to keep her position. You're fighting to keep her whole. Those are different battles. She left before he could respond. That evening, Cora came to the workshop and sat in her usual spot without speaking. She looked hollowed out, present but absent. Callum made tea, set a cup beside her, went back to work. After a long silence, she spoke. Rourke proposed marriage again today, publicly, in front of the full council. Callum's hand stilled. What did you say? I said no, obviously. She stared at the tea. He said he understood, that grief makes people refuse what's good for them, that he'd ask again in a week when I'd had time to think clearly. That's calculated. Yes, he made it sound gentle, compassionate, like he's trying to save me from my own poor judgment. She finally looked up. 3 council members nodded like he was making sense. Callum set down his tools, moved to sit beside her. What do you need? I don't know anymore. I'm so tired of fighting, of defending every breath I take, of pretending I'm strong enough for this. You are strong enough. No, I'm just good at pretending. There's a difference. She closed her eyes. Caspian used to ask me why I never cried. He'd see other adults cry, and he'd ask why I didn't. I told him queens had to be strong, that we carried everyone else's tears so they didn't have to. Her voice cracked. I lied to my son about what strength was, and now he's gone, and I can't tell him the truth. Callum didn't say anything, just sat there, present, witness to her breaking. The truth is, I'm terrified, she continued, terrified that Rourke is right, that I'm not fit for this, that I'm only here because Thorin chose me, and now he's gone, and I have no idea what I'm doing. That doesn't make you unfit. That makes you honest. Honesty doesn't win political battles. Maybe it should. She opened her eyes, looked at him. What would you do if you were me? I'm not you. But if you were? Callum thought about it. I'd stop fighting on their terms. Stop defending myself against questions that don't have good answers. I'd ask my own questions instead. Like what? Like why they're so afraid of a leader who admits to grief. Like what kind of strength they're really asking for. Like whether they want someone who pretends to be invulnerable or someone who's honest about being human. Cora was quiet for a long moment. That's dangerous. So is letting them control the conversation. She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. Not hope exactly, but possibility. I need to show them something, she said. Something that proves I'm still capable of leading, not by defending myself, by doing something they can't question. Like what? She looked at the memorial panels he'd made for Caspian and Finn. Like finishing what I started. The next morning, Cora made an announcement. She would commission a full memorial wall in the eastern courtyard, not just for Caspian and Finn. For all the children lost to the winter fever outbreak, 23 names. A permanent reminder that grief and leadership weren't incompatible. The council was surprised. Rourke was suspicious. This is a waste of resources, he said at the emergency session called to discuss it. Stone labor, funds that could be used for defense. Memorials are not waste, Cora said calmly. They're investment in remembering who we are. We know who we are without expensive stonework. Do we? 'Cause I'm starting to think we've forgotten. She looked at each council member. We've forgotten that leadership means honoring those we've lost. That strength includes grief. That a community that doesn't remember its dead is a community that's already dying. Morgan leaned forward. This is very poetic, but Commander Rourke has a point. Resources are limited. Then I'll fund it personally. From my own holdings, not clan resources, the memorial will be built. The council exchanged glances. Who will do the work? One of the younger elders asked. Callum Hale. Silence. Rourke smiled thinly. The human stonemason. Of course. He's the best craftsman available. He understands what memorials mean. Or you simply want to give him more reasons to stay. Cora's expression didn't change. My personal motivations are irrelevant. The work will be exceptional. That's what matters. The council voted, 4-3 in favor. Barely passed, Cora left the Great Hall and came directly to Callum's workshop. I need the memorial wall completed in 3 weeks, she said without preamble. 3 weeks, Cora, that's... I know, it's impossible, but I need it done before the 30-day review ends. I need something tangible, something they can see. Callum looked at his current workspace, looked at the scope of what she was asking. 23 names, a full wall, carved properly with care, not rushed. I'll need help, he said. You'll have it, whatever you need. And it won't be perfect, not in 3 weeks. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be honest. He nodded slowly. Then we'd better start now. The work consumed everything. Callum worked 16-hour days. Bryn helped with logistics, coordinating stone deliveries, and managing the construction crew that prepared the wall foundation. Cora came every evening, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting nearby while he worked. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. People started helping. First, it was just a few parents, families who'd lost children to the fever. They'd come to watch. Then they started asking if they could help. Simple things, carrying stone, mixing mortar, holding tools. Callum didn't refuse them. By the end of the first week, he had a dozen volunteers. By the second week, 20. They worked in shifts, parents who wanted to be part of remembering their children, elders who understood what the memorial meant, even some of Rourke's supporters drawn, despite themselves, to the quiet power of the work. Rourke watched from a distance, calculating, trying to find the angle that would turn this against Cora. On the 12th day, Bryn pulled Callum aside. I heard something, she said quietly. Rourke's planning something for the dedication ceremony. What kind of something? I don't know exactly, but he's been meeting with engineers, asking questions about structural integrity, load-bearing capacities. Callum felt cold understanding settle over him. He's going to sabotage it. I think so. If the wall fails during the ceremony, it'll destroy Cora's credibility completely. She'll look incompetent, dangerous. Everything he's been saying about her will be proven right. Can we prove it? Catch him before he does it. Not without evidence, and he's too smart to leave evidence. Callum looked at the memorial wall, nearly complete, names already carved, beautiful in its simplicity. Then we don't try to catch him, he said slowly. We make sure the wall is strong enough that nothing he does will matter. How puissant I am. I know stone. I know how to make things hold when they shouldn't. He turned to Bryn. I need you to find out everything you can about what he's planning. Every detail. I'll adapt the construction. She nodded and disappeared. Callum worked through the night, reinforcing joints, adding hidden support structures, over-engineering every connection point. If Rourke was planning to compromise specific load points, Callum would make sure there were 3 backup systems. Cora found him at dawn, still working. You haven't slept, she observed. Can't. Too much to do. Callum, Rourke's going to try something at the dedication. Bryn thinks he'll sabotage the destruction. I'm making sure it won't matter. Cora was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a chisel. Show me what to do. You don't need to. Show me. He showed her. They worked side by side as the sun rose. Queen and Stonemason, building something that would last. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for day 28, 2 days before the council's final vote. The eastern courtyard filled with people, easily 300, families of the lost children, council members, warriors, citizens who'd heard about the memorial and wanted to witness its unveiling. Rourke stood in the front row, expression neutral, eyes watchful. The memorial wall was covered in canvas, ready to be revealed. Callum had done final inspections that morning. Everything was solid, overbuilt, strong enough to withstand anything Rourke might have planned. He hoped. Cora stood before the crowd, wearing full ceremonial attire. She looked like what she was, a queen, but also a mother, the combination of strength and vulnerability that had defined these 30 days. She began to speak. 3 months ago, 23 children died in the winter fever outbreak. 23 futures ended. 23 families lost something irreplaceable. Her voice carried across the courtyard, strong, clear. I lost 2 sons, Caspian and Finn, and in my grief I left. I went somewhere I could mourn without watching eyes, without political consideration. I left because I needed to be a mother before I could be a queen again. The crowd was absolutely silent. Some have said this makes me unfit to lead, that grief is weakness, that a leader should stand above such things. She paused. I disagree. I believe a leader who cannot grieve cannot truly lead, because leadership without humanity is just performance, and performance doesn't honor the dead. She gestured to the covered wall. This memorial was built by many hands, parents who wanted to help remember their children, citizens who understood that remembering matters, and a stonemason who taught me that names on stone aren't just markers, they're promises. Promises that these lives mattered, that they won't be forgotten, that we carry them with us. She pulled the canvas. The wall was revealed. 23 names carved in perfect letters. Dates, small details that made each name individual. A border of mountain wildflowers, the kind that grew in the high meadows where children played. Simple, honest, beautiful. The crowd stood in silence, looking at names, seeing children they'd known, remembering. Then Rourke stepped forward. It's impressive, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Beautiful even. But I have concerns about structural integrity. He gestured to the wall. This structure was built in 3 weeks, rushed. I've consulted with engineers who question its stability. The foundation may not be adequate. The load distribution questionable. He gestured to one of his men who approached with measuring tools. With the Queen's permission, I'd like to conduct a formal inspection. For safety. Cora's expression didn't change. Of course, Commander. Safety is paramount. Rourke's man moved to the wall, pressed against specific points, checking joints that shouldn't need checking unless you knew exactly where the weaknesses were supposed to be. Except there were no weaknesses. Callum had reinforced every point Bryn had warned him about, and added 3 more for good measure. The inspector looked confused, checked his notes, pressed again. Something wrong, Cora asked mildly. The structural report indicated. The man stopped, looked at Rourke. Rourke's expression hardened. What report? The one you gave me, sir, the engineering assessment that showed. I gave you no such report. Bryn stepped forward, holding a document. This report, Commander, the one you commissioned from Engineer Valdez 3 weeks ago, the one that detailed exactly which support points to compromise during construction. Silence crashed across the courtyard. Rourke's jaw tightened. That's a forgery. Engineer Valdez is standing right there, Bryn pointed. He can verify his own work. The elderly orc engineer stepped forward reluctantly. I wrote the assessment. Commander Rourke paid me to identify weaknesses. I thought it was for safety purposes. It was, Rourke said quickly. Then why, Cora asked quietly, did you instruct your man to press exactly on the points that should have been weakened? Why did you look surprised when the wall held? The crowd murmured, understanding rippling through them. Rourke looked at Cora, at the wall, at the faces surrounding him. This is absurd. I was ensuring public safety. You were ensuring my failure. Cora's voice cut through his protest. You couldn't defeat me politically. So you tried to make me defeat myself by sabotaging a memorial to dead children. The murmuring turned angry. Morgan stood from her seat in the crowd. Commander Rourke, you will submit to council investigation. Immediately, Rourke's hand moved toward his weapon. Every guard in the courtyard drew theirs. He stopped, looked around, realized he'd lost. This isn't over, he said quietly to Cora. Yes, she replied, it is. Guards escorted him away. The crowd stood in shocked silence for a moment. Then one by one they turned back to the wall, to the names, to the memorial, to what mattered. The morning of the final vote, Morgan came to find Cora. She found her in the eastern courtyard, standing before the memorial wall in the early dawn light. I owe you an apology, the elder said. Cora turned. For what? For believing that grief made you weak. For supporting Roark's challenge when I should have supported you. Morgan's expression was uncharacteristically soft. My daughter died 40 years ago. I never allowed myself to mourn properly. I called it strength. It wasn't. It was cowardice. Cora didn't know what to say. You're braver than I was, Morgan continued. Braver than most of us, and I will stand with you today. She did. The council voted that afternoon, 6-1 in favor of Cora retaining her position. The investigation into Rourke's sabotage attempt took another week. Engineer Valdez provided detailed testimony. Bryn produced financial records showing payments. 3 of Rourke's own men, unwilling to be implicated in an attack on a children's memorial, testified about the plan. The evidence was overwhelming. Rourke was given a choice: exile or trial. He chose exile. Callum watched him leave from the eastern gate. The commander rode out alone, stripped of rank and title, forbidden from returning to Iron Peak territory for the rest of his life. Do you think he'll try again? Callum asked. Cora stood beside him. No, he's too proud. He'd rather disappear than admit he lost. You sound certain. I know men like him. They can't survive humiliation. Exile is worse than death for someone like Rourke. She paused. He'll rebuild somewhere else. Start over. And he'll tell himself a story about how he was betrayed. But he won't come back. She was right. They never saw Rourke again. That evening, Bryn appeared in Callum's workshop, grinning. You did it, she said. Cora did it. I just made sure the wall didn't fall down. You did more than that. You gave her something solid to stand on. Literally and figuratively. She left still grinning. Cora came later. Much later. After dark. After the celebrations had died down and the stronghold had settled into normal evening rhythms. She sat on the workbench without speaking. Callum made tea, set a cup beside her, the routine they'd developed over these weeks. Thank you, she said finally. You already thanked me. Not enough, she looked at him. You didn't have to come here, didn't have to help, didn't have to spend 3 weeks building a wall that might have destroyed both of us if it had failed. It didn't fail because you made sure it wouldn't, because you understood what was at stake. Callum sat beside her. What happens now? Now I lead properly, without Rourke undermining everything. The council will still question me sometimes. That's their job, but I've proven I can handle it. So you're staying? I'm staying, she paused. Are you? I don't have anywhere else to be. That's not an answer. Callum looked at his workshop, at the tools he'd unpacked and arranged, at the life he'd started building here without quite meaning to. I told you I needed to find my own space, he said. I think I have, here, this workshop, this work. He looked at her. This, whatever this is, these evenings, the tea, the conversations, the feeling like I'm useful instead of just occupying space. Cora smiled, small but real. I believe the Orcish word is Kethera, the place where grief fits. You said that in West Virginia. I meant it then. I mean it now. You built Kethera for me. Twice. They sat in comfortable silence, the tea cooling, the workshop warm from the small forge. Outside, the memorial wall stood in the courtyard. Solid, permanent, names caught in stone, promises kept. After a long while, Cora spoke again. I want to go back, to West Virginia, to where I buried them first. When Kaisbar spring, when the roads are clear. She turned to look at him. Would you come with me? To dig them up and to bring them home, to bury them here properly, in the clan cemetery, next to Thorin. She paused. They should be together. All of them. The family I had, the family I lost. Callum nodded. I'll come. It won't be easy. The travel, the digging, the ceremony. Important things rarely are. She reached out and took his hand. The gesture familiar now. Comfortable. Connection without complication. There's something else, she said quietly. What? The council asked about you, about your status here, whether you're a permanent resident or just a temporary contractor. What did you tell them? I told them you were permanent, if you wanted to be. She looked at him. Do you? Callum thought about his cabin in West Virginia. Empty now, cold. the life he'd built there out of grief and solitude, and the need to be nowhere specific. He thought about this workshop, the memorial wall, the evenings with Cora where he felt like himself instead of a ghost occupying his own life. Yes, he said, I want to be permanent. Even though people will talk and question and make assumptions, let them talk. She smiled, squeezed his hand. I'm going to hold you to that. I expect you will. They sat there as the night deepened. Two people who'd found each other in the worst moment of their lives and somehow built something lasting from that shared wreckage. It wasn't a fairy tale, wasn't a grand romance, wasn't anything that would make sense on paper, but it was real. And real was what they both needed. Spring came slowly to the Colorado Rockies. Snow melted in patches, ice broke up in streams, the high meadows turned green, and wildflowers started appearing in clusters of color against the stone. Callum and Cora left Iron Peak on a Tuesday morning, just the two of them. Ragnar had wanted to send guards, but Cora refused. This was private, personal, something that needed to be done without witnesses. They drove Callum's truck across 3 states, stayed in motels that asked no questions, talked about everything and nothing, about Caspian's habit of climbing things he shouldn't, about Finn's quiet presence, about Thorin and Alara, and the people they'd been before death made them memories. They reached Coleridge Cemetery on the 4th day. The 2 small graves were exactly as they'd left them, slightly settled, grass growing in patches. The slate markers perfectly aligned facing east. They dug carefully, respectfully, removed the cedar boxes that held what remained of 2 small boys who died too young. Callum had brought new boxes, stronger, better sealed. He transferred everything with the same care he'd use handling living children. Cora knelt beside the empty graves for a long time, saying goodbye to this place, to the hillside where she'd broken, to the version of herself who'd been too destroyed to stand. Thank you, she said quietly. To the hill, to the sky spine, to whatever was listening, they filled in the graves, left the markers. Someday someone else might wonder whose children had been buried here, why 2 small stones faced east in an unmarked section of hillside. The stories we leave behind don't always make sense to those who find them. They drove back to Colorado, back to Iron Peak, back home. The burial ceremony was small, just family, just clan, Ragnar and Bryn and the council and citizens who'd known Caspian and Finn in their brief lives. They laid the boys to rest beside Thorin, 3 graves in a row, father and sons. Together finally. Cora didn't cry, not publicly, but that evening in Callum's workshop, she broke, quietly, completely, and he held her through it, witness to her grief, present without trying to fix anything. Because some things can't be fixed. They can only be carried. 6 months later, Callum's workshop had become a fixture of Iron Peak life. People came with commissions, headstones, memorial plaques, decorative work. He'd hired 2 apprentices, young orcs, who wanted to learn the craft. He taught them the same way he'd learned: patience, precision, respect for the material, respect for the names. Bryn had graduated to full council translator. She spent half her time managing correspondence between Iron Peak and human settlements, building bridges that had never existed before. Morrigan had become, if not friendly, at least respectfully neutral. She still questioned Cora's decisions sometimes, but she'd stopped questioning her fitness to lead. Cora herself had changed, not completely. She was still the same person, still carried the same grief, but she'd learned to lead while grieving, to be strong enough to show weakness, to understand that vulnerability wasn't the opposite of power. She visited the workshop most evenings. They developed a routine: tea, conversation, comfortable silence while Callum worked and Cora sat nearby, just being present. One evening in early autumn, she brought something with her. A letter. It's from Helen, Callum said, recognizing the handwriting. She wrote to me, Cora said, care of the Iron Peak Council, asking if you were well, if you were happy, if I was taking care of you. Callum smiled. That sounds like Helen. I wrote back, told her you were fine, that you'd found work that mattered, that you were building a life here. What did she say? She said she was glad, that you deserved to be happy, that Alara would have wanted that for you. Oh. Cora set the letter down. She asked if you'd ever come visit, bring me to meet her properly. Would you want that? Meeting your past, meeting the people who knew you before? Cora considered. Yes, I think I would. Even though it's West Virginia and you're an orc chieftain, and it'll be complicated. We've handled worse. They sat in silence for a while. I've been thinking, Cora said eventually, about legacy, about what we leave behind. And Caspian and Finn are gone, but their names are on that wall, in stone, permanent. People will remember them long after I'm gone, long after anyone who knew them is gone. That's the point of memorials. I know, but it's more than that. She looked at him. It's about building things that last, things that matter. Whether that's stone walls or communities or, she trailed off, or whatever this is that we're building. You and me. This thing that doesn't have a name, but feels more real than anything else in my life. Callum set down his tools. What are you asking? I'm asking if you're content, here, with this, with me visiting your workshop and drinking tea and talking about dead people and complicated politics. Yes, he said simply. I'm content. Not happy. I think contentment might be better than happiness. Happiness is temporary. Contentment is steady. Like good stone. It holds. She smiled. Very stonemason of you. What about you, Are you content? Cora thought about it. I'm still grieving. I expect I always will be. But I'm also leading, building, creating things that matter. And I have someone who sees me, really sees me. Not the queen, not the warrior, just me. That's what you have, Callum agreed, for as long as you want it. Be careful making promises like that. I might hold you to them. I'm counting on it. She moved closer, rested her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They sat like that, watching the workshop fire burn down to coals. Outside, the stronghold was settling into evening. Voices in the distance. Cooking fires. The ordinary sounds of a community living. The memorial wall stood in the eastern courtyard. 23 names, 2 of them, Caspian and Finn. Catching light. Holding memory. In the clan cemetery, 3 graves sat in a row. Thorin and his sons. At rest, finally. And in a small workshop on the eastern edge of Iron Peak Stronghold, 2 people sat together in comfortable silence. A queen and a stonemason. Building something from grief and honesty and the quiet courage of showing up for each other day after day. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real was what they both needed. Years later, long after Cora and Callum were gone, people would still visit the memorial wall. They'd run their fingers over the carved names. Wonder about the children who'd died too young. About the queen who'd built this monument to grief. And they'd see the stonemason's mark at the bottom. Small, unobtrusive. CH. For those who rest where they are loved. The stories we leave behind don't always make sense to those who find them. But they last. If we build them right. If we make them true. In memory of all those who've learned that grief and love are not opposites but companions. That strength includes the courage to break. That the most permanent things we build and are not made of stone, but of honesty, presence, and the willingness to witness each other's pain. May we all find our Kithara. May we all build things that last.